Thank you to our panellists. Some very important cultural strands that run through problems faced in many of the countries that we've talked to now. However, the next stage of what we will do now is we'll open it up for comments and discussion, and the group of the University of South Pacific will give us a wrap-up and response at the end of the session. But to open up the discussion and question sessions, I'd like to invite Shailendra Singh. Alex is the Editor-in-Chief of the Papua New Guinea Post-Courier, and he's with us here this morning. He's also the Chair of the Media Council of Papua New Guinea. And I think it would be really good, Alex, you might like to add some thoughts on your experience with journalism, training and education in the region.
Well, thanks, David. I appreciate the presentation given by Emily on the insight into the student unrest, and it was definitely a wake-up call for the media industry back in Papua New Guinea. I am aware of some newsrooms starting to change their reporting culture in response to all the criticism. And a lot of the criticism was made on social media. There were individual reporters, including myself, who were called all kinds of names and accused of all kinds of things by Papua New Guineans. I think one thing that, for me personally, one thing that I gathered from all these online interaction was a lot of Papua New Guineans don't really understand the process of news gathering and how individual media organizations have their own checks and balances in place before a story gets on the air or into the newspaper the next day. So I think there's an opportunity for the media industry to hold an expo back in Port Moresby, and the general public gets to be invited to attend the expo, and then individual media organizations from both electronic and print media can, basically give them a rundown on how a newsroom operates, because that's what I saw. A lot of the criticisms were warranted because, journalists in Papua New Guinea, being public figures themselves, their conduct has to come under scrutiny on a 24/7 basis. So people did see a lot of, there were journalists who were probably spending too much time with a particular politician, for example. So consequently, that information made its way onto Facebook. And then media started a whole lot of debate about what sort of conversations took place, what was exchanged, all of that. So in terms of holding a media expo, that's something that the Media Council will need to consider going forward. And I think this crisis at the University of Papua New Guinea, the shooting of the student demonstrators, that was an opportunity. That's a wake-up call, and it also provides a foundation for us to reach out to the audience out there. And of course, we take the threats that social media has for mainstream media. But my whole perspective on social media is Papua New Guineans have never been given an opportunity and a platform like that to actually engage in conversation, not only between themselves, but directly with politicians. There are a couple of MPs who actually have Facebook pages, and Papua New Guineans are getting on Facebook and actually talking to their politicians directly. It's never happened before in the 40-year history of the country. So we support social media. We encourage Papua New Guineans to engage in social media, but we just ask them we would like to get them to engage in more critical and educated discourse instead of the raw stuff that they're currently engaging in. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Alex. And just a point I'd like to make, when I was at UPNG, I was very conscious of the fact that through our journalism program there, that a number of students actually saw journalism was actually a stepping stone to a political career through the skills that they achieved. I found that quite a unique situation. Anyway, thank you very much. So we're going to open it up to the floor. Could you, as we're live streaming here, could you please identify yourself when you ask questions? Thanks. Yes.
I'm calling Senior. At the moment, I'm based in Bangkok at Auckland University. But I was head of research at AMIC, Asian Media Information and Communication Center, for 7 years. What Shailendra and Madam saying about is very much an issue in many Asian countries, in Asia as well, especially in the smaller countries, Indochina and South Asian countries, not India, the other countries surrounding India, about research. Because when I was at AMIC, we get research papers every year, and I used to review a lot of it. And what I find is literature reviews rather than really on the ground research from those countries. And those reviews quote one Anglo-Saxon after another. You don't get any other quotes, or very rarely you get quotes from Asians or even Europeans. Now, when I was head of research at AMIC, I didn't have a research budget. So I could not pay researchers and commission unless I get grants from UNESCO or FES or wherever, mainly from the West. So, and that was very frustrating to develop real indigenous Asian researchers. And towards the end, I was trying to get around it by asking Asian scholars to do a chapter for a book we want to. So one chapter from each country, and do it as part of your work at the university. So we don't have to pay for it. The message I got often was they were not very keen on it because there's these ranking systems and promotion systems in the universities where your promotions into professorships basically are based on you being quoted and published in certain these top tier journals which are mainly American. So what their research is, they do research fit into this American norm. So that is a huge problem, and I think Shailendra was referring to that, developing indigenous research. And that is often, it's also a problem with university administrations. So I don't know what the USP policy is for promotions in the mass comm area, that if you need to, you get higher points if you are quoted in those magazines. Even the Media Asia journal AMIC was publishing was not recognized by the very university we were based in, NTU. And now at NTU, I have been teaching there for the last 3 years. They had the top ranking in Asia for mass communications. But that's by Americanizing the curriculum and the department. Even the courses I teach had a very strong Asian perspective. And students used to complain often that a lot of the other lecturers teach out of American textbooks, which are sometimes not applicable to Asian environment or Asian. So now at the moment I work, just this month moved to Auckland University because we have a project funded by UNESCO called Mindful Communication for ASEAN Integration. And it's bringing in philosophical ideas from Asia, from Buddhist, Hindu, Confucius, into curriculum, journalism curriculum and mass comm. And I was talking with Shailendra earlier, and we would like to have a workshop at USP, bringing in Pacific Island journalism lecturers together to see how those ideas could also be adopted in the Pacific. So I keep on saying in this project, we just had a workshop for Asian journalists, journalism lecturers, that our biggest challenge is to decolonize the minds of Asian scholars. We are not interested in the Western scholars. First, we have to decolonize the minds of the Asian scholars so that they do not look at the norm as what is there, which comes from America, not even Europe. And that's the biggest problem. And I think you have pointed it out very clearly. It's a matter of money. That's the other issue. And I believe there is money now. In Asia, there is money. But a lot of that money very often is paid to consultants to come from America. For your whole people. So I'll just put
Yeah, just quickly clarify the USP situation. USP is really pushing for research now, and there is, I was saying, there's a rewards and incentive system. And this system is linked to publishing in rank journals, for example, A-tier or A-plus tier journals. I think at $5,000 for an A-plus journal if you publish, and maybe about $3,000 for an A-rank journal. But what USP has also done is included some local journals into their ranking system to balance everything out. So I think what this does is allow perhaps expatriate lecturers to pursue their own research interests and also allow research into local issues and problems. So I think it's a fairly good approach. And more, instead of rankings, USP is now shifting towards research that can affect policy in a positive manner. So I think that's where the emphasis is now shifting for the better.
Yeah, we have a similar system with the USB as well. It's also I'm required as part of my job to do more research. So there's 2 more research papers coming, and it should be completed by. We are hosting 10 Australian media journalism students next semester, which is next year from January to June. And this is what we've been very successful at, in terms of the media program, is forging partnerships with institutions in New Zealand and Australia. So we signed the MOU with James Cook University. So we're under the New Colombo plan. So they're coming to NUS to study full block semester. And that research paper alone is looking at from the indigenous perspective of what would be the experience in doing journalism in Samoa. And the fact is we've always been talking about the discussion in the region was always about parachute journalism. So how to avoid that is to start from that level, is to bring a lot of Pacific stories and to the minds of, for example, in this case scenario, Australian media students. In that way, when they get to the industry, at least somebody somewhere at some point do a lot of Pacific coverage on stories around the region. But we would welcome support from your institution as well. We'd love to. It's one of the things that we talked about as the newly formed group is to have a journal, a publication, or something together as a team, and to develop more research skills. And I'm not saying that we're experts on that, but we welcome the technical assistance of you have professors and PhDs in this room as well. So thank you.
David, can I just make a very quick comment?
Yes. Sorry, we just got a response from Shailendra.
Yes, before I forget, I think Karina made a really important point about decolonizing the minds of Pacific researchers, yes. But I think there's a precondition to that, and there is also weaning the Pacific away from its heavy reliance on donor funds. What's happening to the TVETs is they are in a parlous state because governments and the university as a whole are refusing to provide funding. And I think the hope is, and the reliance is on the donors, to come and rescue them. So there are 2 elements. I mean, at least that's my view.
Oh, kia ora, Guten Morgen. I'm Richard Matasororo and I lead the Graduate Diploma in Pacific Journalism here at AUT. I just want to respond to your comment and the Routledge Dictionary of Philosophy. Routledge is one of the publishing people we like to go with. It doesn't have the word Pacific in its index. So I just think that we need to place that thought there around how we look at the literature. What my colleague Dr. Tina Brown and I are doing here is using an autoethnographic approach to research, and we are writing about what we want to write about, how we want to write about it, and publishing it on Te Kaharoa, which is the indigenous journal that the university has. So if you want to do stuff with the Pacific Media Centre and put it into David's rated journal, that's fine. But we are really open, working with Professor Paul Moon, for other material to come into our environment as well. Because it is really important that scholars are able to, as you're saying, use their own thinking, their own methodologies to lift up the thinking around what we're doing.
Good, and I think I'd like to mention too that out of the Pacific Media Centre here at AUT we have Pacific Journalism Review, which has been publishing now for 22 years and collaborated with the University of South Pacific. And in the next edition we're actually devoting this to specific research for the edition coming out, papers coming out of this conference. That'll be produced later in the year. And also I mentioned that Asia Pacific report, which was founded in January this year, has been running now for several months, and the policy of that is very much based around students from across the Pacific. Many have been writing that. And during the 2 months of crisis in Papua New Guinea, I think we were the only New Zealand media that comprehensively followed and reported on what was happening, just as an example. So next question, please. Yes, Eddie, thank you.
Just for Emily, in your presentation, she blamed the print media. It must be possible in PNG FM for not covering the protests well. Can you explore more on that? Why?
Okay, I made reference to Postgres because I said the students bent the newspapers, and then I gave a comment. The student leader commented that they thought that the reporting in the Postgres was biased and shallow. So that's why I used Postgres. With PNG FM, I referred to a specific instance when I was listening to the radio that the governor was presented, or the governor addressed the residents saying that, everything is okay, you should not panic and all that. And after he said that, a caller called and said, he tried to tell his story of what he witnessed at the hospital. Okay, and when he was saying that, he probably wanted to explain that he saw some students who were probably seriously injured to the point of death, and the announcer on PNG FM immediately switched him off air and played some music. And for me, I saw that the media was controlling people's discussions, and so I thought, for me personally, I thought that was responsible, because if he had gone on to explain what he saw at the hospital, more people would be calling and giving their versions of the story, and in the end, it doesn't do any good to the order in the city. Yeah. Thank you.
Alex, thank you.
I just want to give an update on what the Media Council in Papua New Guinea is doing to address that. The council at its meeting at its AGM 2 months ago agreed to set up an independent press complaints committee that is totally that works outside of the Media Council executive. So and Papua New Guineans will readers, viewers can be able to lodge their grievances about content with the committee. So we are in the process of setting up that structure and recruiting people, both one from within the industry and at least 3 from outside of the industry, maybe with a lawyer or someone of high committee standing to sit in on the committee, so that can enable us to bring back integrity into the industry, so that readers and viewers have a vehicle to be able to go and address their complaints and grievances about content that's put up by the media and PNG. So, Michael, I think I might be knocking on your door soon.
Yes.
The Australian Press Council to actually ask for your assistance to help us to set up that committee.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Anna.
Kia ora, I'm Hannah Spixner, formerly of AUT. Thank you all for your presentations. I've recently done some research looking at the role of NGOs reporting from the Pacific, specifically Vanuatu. And my research found, surprisingly, that this particular NGO, 350 Pacific, as part of the wider 350.org global movement, was able to facilitate NEVA voices being kind of pushed into a global discussion about climate change, and the way that it enabled this reporting to happen was actually in a way that David Robie, I know that you've described, and that Pacific journalism educators and scholars have talked about as more of a Pacific way. But on the contrast to that, I know that there's also a lot of research about the role of NGOs being quite problematic in coming in and that providing that funding for kind of small one-off journalism training. And so I just wondered to all of you what you thought the role of NGOs should be in training of journalists in the Pacific.
The National University of Samoa, our department has been proactive in terms of engaging the NGOs to do annual training. And at the National University of Samoa, we have the Center for Professional Development, where the NGO is the umbrella for NGOs is the beneficiary of most of that funding. So we get to do a lot of media training with NGOs, and as a trainer over the last 2 years with NGOs, what I found was most of the participants who came to these trainings do not have basic access to a computer. First and foremost, I mean, if you would like to have, to play the role of being a journalist, first and foremost, you're undergoing, you're doing this training, and then do what next? Sustainability of making sure that these skills and knowledge are being applied into that small community media outlet you're doing. But what I found was when we did the feedback study, again, was neither of these organizations do exist anymore. And second of all, most of them do not have a computer to do layouts, and most of them were up front, we're doing some sort of a news outlet, newsletter, just a simple one, 2 pages, and that was it. Maintenance on the other side is the issue with NGOs. I mean, they can play the role of being a media person, but at the end of the day, I mean, how active are they in making sure that it sustains, for long term? Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like perhaps the money could be better directed in that sense to.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure that they are fully equipped at some point, or just basic access to those. Yeah, and even a simple camera, taking photos of. Yeah, it's a.
As examples, particularly very much. David, you want to make a response? Would you like to respond?
So, one of those engineers.
Particularly in Vanuatu, we didn't receive any funding from NGOs. The only thing is we engage them in a public speaking during our sessions. So that's the only contribution that we get from NGOs. Yeah.
Michael.
At the meeting yesterday and again today, I'm hearing that relations between some of the media outlets in your countries and the journalism schools are uneasy at best or at times, and also that you have worries about the quality of the journalism, obviously, in some countries. Shallow, biased, these are words you use. I'd like to understand a bit better, among the journalists who are doing that sort of work that you find problematic, the ones who are working in the industry, what's the pathway into those jobs? Are they graduates of other sorts of programs, or are they not graduates? How do the people who are in the industry at the moment and whose work is questioned, how are they getting to be journalists, and what training do they have?
Yeah, I'll respond to that in the PG context. I did a survey in 2012 as part of my PhD, and I found, I think only 49% of the journalist folks in Fiji have any form of PhD qualification. And this includes certificates and diplomas. So that's something to begin with. Now, secondly, if you join a newsroom, there's not always that opportunity for you to do good journalism because of deadline and commercial pressures. So that's another factor. You see, I mean, they want stories to be churned out as quick as possible, and they're not able to devote resources for longer pieces and investigative journalism and all that. That's a second issue. But I think the third and the most pressing issue is the fact that journalism is not seen as a viable career in places like Fiji and other Pacific Island countries. So you don't get the cream of the crop, both in terms of tertiary education and also people joining the media industry. And so there's a high turnover rate because the media industry is not able to compete in terms of paying salaries. So my research also showed that the experience, as far as the experience was concerned, I think it was about 30% or so had less than 3 years experience, and about 50% had less than 5 years experience. What I also found was that the experienced journalists, they were not out in the front line. They were not out there interviewing or writing news. They were managing the newsroom. So we have all these dynamics and problems. And that sort of explains some of these.
It does, it's helpful, but what I was also getting at is, are you finding, and I know it's hard to make general statements across the region, but are you finding that the problems with the quality of journalism is as a result of directives from senior editors to do a certain kind of journalism, or is it simply because people are not trained to do good journalism?
Yeah, there is but one cause. I mean, what the editors are telling the journalists is one cause maybe, but I can't speculate. There's one possible cause. In Fiji's case, as I pointed out, it's inexperience. We've got a very young and highly inexperienced journalist force because there's continuous turnover. This is not a new problem. This problem has existed for a number of decades. So when people talk about the standard of journalism, you need to look at the people who are actually doing the reporting and how long they stay in the newsroom and what is the newsroom capacity over the long term. Then you start to understand the problem.
Yes, Alex. Thanks.
Okay, Michael, just to give you the PNG context, there are some reporters back in PNG who got sloppy and lazy. So there are reporters who basically push through unbalanced stories. A lot of times the editors come under a lot of pressure to meet the deadlines, and there's a tendency to run unbalanced stories on the understanding that we'll get the other side of for comments tomorrow. Now that's been happening over the last few years. Most times the stories are run based on the merits of the story, depending on a national issue. And there's a lot of fierce competition now, not only between mainstream media colleagues, but with social media. So now speed is becoming a necessity in the news cycle in PNG. So a lot of stories get run without incorporating comments from the other party. And there's been one or two occasions when senior reporters do this, and they've just become lazy. They just don't want to get the other side of the story to incorporate into the story.
Yes, Evan.
Just to add on to what Alex said, I am finding that there's some groups of people, or some groups of journalists and people who think they are journalists that are entering the workforce. Okay, in the University of PNG's experience, we had one degree, a degree for arts. Okay, so you can take up a journalism major and then take a minor sequence for the environmental science, or you could take a environmental science and minor in journalism. And I've seen that out in the workforce, that some students who did not study journalism major get employed in the news outlets. Okay, that's one group. The other group is students who have failed their studies at the university, who are now accepted and employed by news outlets. And I don't blame them for their sloppy reporting, but that's what I'm finding. And then you have students from Divine Word who graduate with a degree in communication. Okay, thank you very much. Yes. And then students who graduate with another degree who major in journalism from the University of Papua.
David,
Yes.
briefly, if I may, because you asked the question, Michael, about the, because when you get to the process of when a media organization gets sued, it's not a question of the reporter getting the story, but you get sued for the whole line of production is responsible for that story. Now, this suicide story was the reporter did not come through formal training, and I find it myself, it's the whole line of production. That's in question. It's not just about the reporter or the proofreader. At some point, it's everyone's involved. So the whole newsroom needs that. Need to do. What I found in Samoa is this lack of mentorship. When our graduates do come to the newsrooms, they are expected. These are just diploma graduates, so they are expected as PhDs who do have, who can do analysis and critical thinking. So they're always on their own, and that's something we've raised with our advisory boards, who are members of the industry, that to ensure that there's such system in place. When they come out, they need at least 1, 2, 3 years to be mentored at least, because there are also other cultural factors involving journalism at the same time. So I know there's one particular organization that has done that. At least there's someone senior to mentor these graduates, because it's once they come out of the university, they're out of our hands. We've done our job. So mentorship is very important to ensure that they are being maintained and being kept in the industry for a long time.
Good, thank you. Thank you, and Leo.
It's really good to see a panel who crystallise the issues and boil it straight down to main concerns for us. That's good. It started me thinking, remembering that the history of media education in the Pacific is using a broad brush and giving a lot of people media training, but you can move away from that now. Technology permitting access to technology with social media, and even if I can use the E word elite and talk about good elites as opposed to bad elites in the same way as you talk about good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. It would be really good to, if you're up against corruption and ethical dilemmas, just must have very secure, a very secure cadre of professional journalists, well and truly trained up. Now, that's not to betray the large numbers of young people who wanted to get media training in the past, because what you can do is consider a second strand of activity, call in a second strand of activity which we could call media literacy. It's getting to what Alex was starting to talk about, the social media being rough and with no analytical evidence in it or anything like that. So if the universities take on media literacy, you can use online services, mentor students, take shortcuts that way with resources. That might spare you some resources to put an effort into and resources into research. That would please Shailendra's concerns a little bit there. But that people receiving this with their social media, well, that could bring us to this question of ethics and dealing with trouble and tragedy, whether it's a suicide story or the police firing on young student protesters in PMC. That social media then kicks in and becomes very powerful public forum. And I had a glimpse of it from what I know. The limited stuff I know about this comes from Panellists too, with Yumi Toksari and some of the outlets there, where it seems to be like there's a culture there which acts as a good civil society factor, has to do with media and media training. So just want to know what you think about the option of, well, especially cultivating media literacy and sort of doing that instead of a lot of straight out formal media training for mainstream media, where how would it appeal to people? Would they come and do it, pay a fee, whatever?
Who'd like to respond?
Yeah, I think it's it amounts to over the last 4 years we've had this discussion with the advisory board, with members of the industry. How can this is no longer about journalism itself? This is no longer about not the skills, going through that formal training, but the doing of journalism in Samoa, like the Samoan way. How can we, because this is the influx of technology, and everyone's been talking about, you know, if you come to Samoa, Facebook is considered as, it's a bad thing. It's like you've seen that movie, God Must Be Crazy, when you see that bottle of Coke, it's like, it's bad, it's from somewhere else. So our role really is to and you have the gap between the older generation and the younger generation. We saw it like we need to take this to the grassroots level, and we've had that proposal done to be given to the Ministry of Education to ensure that this is more than journalism. It's media studies, we call it, and you know, trying to how to use social media effectively. I think that's the issue in Samoa at the moment. How we can, instead of that bad picture of Facebook, there's more to it than Facebook. How to connect the Samoa with the influx of, you know, universal concepts. It's not just media. There's other things as well. There are other thematic areas as well that's in the way of the Samoa. But we really need to come out and explain that and justify why we are. There's such this conception, this notion of the older generation not respecting, because at the end of the day, we don't have a place in the Samoa. The media does not have a sitting in that traditional setup of Samoa. In a context that they've got protocols. The Samoa has protocols, and to bring in press freedom with the notion that you're free to do whatever you want, I think we need to start building from here to explain what media is before we actually get into other contexts as well. So we have a lot of work to do in trying to build that trust. Like I said in the beginning, we need to build that trust first with the community before we even get to introduce all these philosophies. I think so.
Yeah. I think you made a good point there, because I often think we say we are training journalists. We should be calling we are training communicators rather than journalists, because the word journalist is now connected with various mainstream media. Now I know some of the students I have taught at diploma level in the Polytechnic in Singapore. I have met them working in cabin crews in Singapore Airlines and Thai Airways, and some are preschool teachers because they have learned communications. Also, one other point when we are saying about mindful communication and bringing Asian philosophies into it. Now, there was a syndicate here which called de-westernizing communication theory, and I said, no, we should be calling it balancing, because it's not an anti-Western crusade. There are some of these theories which are relevant, which are useful, but we are trying to add, we are trying to modify them to suit our conditions. And one area, and I'm sure it's also relevant to the Pacific, is community radio, where I've been working quite a bit. I have also worked on UNESCO projects. There is a huge resistance across Asia for community radio, because the whole concept of community radio comes under that fourth estate formula of dissident media. So, and they have also set up community radio across Asia through funding from Western agencies. And you won't get funding unless you are distant. You want to set up distant media. Now we need to come up with theories and models where, especially at grassroots level, in the rural areas outside the cities, we could create media which could work in harmony with local government authorities, even religious institutions. Once I wanted to train Buddhist monks in communication. So that if we create media at very local level, grassroots level, and we train people in the institutions to work in that media, that could help in addressing issues of corruption and good governance. And I can see from students from China who have been in my class and done assignments. There is very strong grassroots media through internet in China, which has triggered the anti-corruption drive, which has been quite effective. Now, I in Singapore, the bloggers have influenced government policy, especially on immigration, because Singapore, Malaysia, China, all those countries employ graduates, mass comm graduates, in the information ministry to monitor social media. They don't try to block it. They monitor social media, discussions in the social media, and report to the government. And government responds. So the immigration policy in Singapore was changed not because the mainstream media reported, they didn't, but because of this. So there are these communication happening at these levels with new technology coming in, and we need to address that. And that's where we can go outside the current theories. And one other thing is also business reporting. What we do, we teach business reporters to translate data and look at stock markets. But what about the informal sector? I'm sure it's the same in the Pacific, right across Asia. The real economics, the red markets and informal sector, and you hardly have reporting body, especially not in business reporting. So these are new ideas we need to bring into the curriculum in these regions.
Well, at that point, I think Ricky might like to sum up some responses there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'd like to thank the presenters for those lovely informative presentations. Just to sum up some of the few points. Start off with David addressed a very important mission statement in noting that the panel was to basically promote the highest level of journalism education in the region. And to begin with, Emily talked about a very important movement that has basically been taking place in PMC, and that is the student movement in calling for the resignation of the Prime Minister to let the police investigation take its course, and basically how the media has supported in covering the issue. And she noted a point about how the student body stating that they have no trust in the media, which is quite a worrying statement. And again, this is something that she talked about, that this statement needs to be investigated, how the student body, basically, they have no trust in the media. And also, to look at Shailendra Singh talked about the basic lack of support in the journalism education in the region, and also the important need to train journalists, and how there is not enough qualified and experienced trainers to train the journalists, which is something that has been a long-standing issue, and how important the support from the institution to help carry that through. And Vicky, I got myself mixed up. Yep, there you go. Vicky basically also alluded to, in support to what Shailendra said, in terms of the need to have experienced trainers to train the journalists, and how there seems to be no sense of respect for the profession of journalism, particularly from the community, which is something that we need to actually address in the region. And also, Dave talked about how they've sort of like become a psychologist, and something that they have to address in the social and cultural context, in how females do not actually get to have a say, particularly when in their school they have more females than males. So I hope that basically some of the points that the panel have discussed. And thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thank you, Ricky. That really brings us to the close of this really interesting, stimulating session. I'd really like to thank our panellists, Shailendra, Emily, Dave, and Lisa Vicky, and all the contributions from our audience here this morning. Thank you very much.